But hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Well, we can say happy Friday Eve, right? But yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hope everyone is well. Thank you for joining us for part two of Women in Tech, Engineering Inclusion. Just a quick note from me is that we really, really appreciated all of your feedback from part one, and we've shaped that into this part two with Meagan, Dr. Meagan, and the team. So huge thank you. I know I caught myself there, and I know you say call me Meagan, but I can't help it. I want to respect your doctor. Sorry, derailed myself there. But yes, thank you so much for your participation in the first one. Cannot wait for your contribution, participation, and shaping this one in part two. And Dr. Meagan, I'm handing over to you.
Thanks. And I'm real serious, y'all. Please call me Meagan. I'm so glad that you've joined us back today. We're going to have a good time talking about some of the recap of what we did last time, but also thinking a little bit forward on how do we begin to reduce some of the stress and that we deal with on a daily basis. So as Laura said, my name is Meagan Pollock, and I am really excited to be with you. It's been great working with Fanatics over the last month. And I'm based out of Dallas, Texas, and my company is called Engineer Inclusion. And so you'll hear that language a lot and how we can truly intentionally engineer inclusion for ourselves and for those around us. I do want to introduce you to my colleagues. So Kayla was with us and the tech directors, but she wasn't able to be with us last month. And so Kayla and I have a connection. We both went to Purdue School of Engineering Education for our doctorate. She is almost finished with that dissertation. She is wrapping it up. And as she does that, she's a professor right now in the IUPUI system. And she also is an engineer, and she has 10 years experience working within the medical industry. And my other colleague that I have with us today, Kathleen, she was with us last month. And Kathleen is also an engineer, and she had her career at Hewlett Packard and then took time off to raise her two beautiful twin daughters, and then rejoined the workforce and I got to work with her when through our nonprofit work focused on equity within STEM careers. And so I'm really glad that she's joined us. I want to again set a tone for how we wish for us all to engage in this space today. And this is what I call the engineer inclusion session pledge. Some people call them group norms, shared agreements, guidelines, how we want to operate today. And, this is because every group is going to naturally develop some normative behaviors, expectation, and like unwritten ways of knowing and operating. And so for us to intentionally try to engineer inclusion, we want to set and establish norms that sort of scaffold an equitable and inclusive practice. And so the four that we have here is one, we want to invite you to stay engaged. One, we know this is hard. We know you got jobs, you got emails, dings, everything's going. Do your best to engage in the conversation today, because that benefits us and it benefits the other people here. And so yourself best, whatever you need to do to close, set things away, to be a participant. It also means to choose to actively and empathically listen and trust that others will do the same for us. Second, we want to share the mic. I know this is something I have to pay attention to because I, especially in groups, have a tendency to have a lot more to say than others might be given space to. And so we want to make sure that every voice contributes, especially when we go into the breakout room. We want to make sure that you're inviting, that everyone has a chance to share. So we want to invite those quiet voices in, and we really depend on you to create the equitable space in those breakouts. Third, we want to support each other. All of us are on different parts of our journey to understanding our experience, and maybe new or seasoned Fanatics employees. And so we want to support each other in our process to navigating with patience, kindness, respect. We want to reject stereotypes. We want to reject prejudice and bias and really focus on the unfiltered evidence. And then finally, I encourage you to stretch and reflect in this process. We are all accountable for our words and our actions, and we believe that we can improve with practice and effort. And so we invite you to join us with that. Another key thing I want to set up today is to recognize that we're not trying to solve all the world's problems today. If we could, I mean, we probably could, but we could at least make a dent in it. But today we're really focused on a couple of key things that we want to talk about. And so it's useful for us in all of our work to really pay attention to those things that we can control and that we can influence. And the areas where we're concerned, we acknowledge them, we don't dismiss them, but we sort of set them aside and say, like, I can't control and influence this, so I'm not going to like burn my energy there. We want us to really focus our energy. If you feel yourself kind of getting stretched out to like areas where we can't control, like, systemic oppression, gender pay gap, like these kinds of things, like we can't solve them right now and today, reel yourself back in so we can focus on those things that we can control. We also want to fully acknowledge, and this, came up in our conversation last time, is that we aren't here to fix you. And we aren't here to say we're trying to patch up the women in technology to like uphold all equity issues at Fanatics. That's not what we're trying to do. Our goal today is to give you community, recognizing that we all, as women who are underrepresented within the tech industry as a whole, face lots of obstacles and lots of barriers. And so today is, how do we support each other as we are supporting ourselves in this journey? And so again, Fanatics has made a commitment to training leaders, to beginning to implement lots of equitable and inclusive practices. And so those things are going on in tandem with our conversation today. So I'm going to do just a quick recap of what we did last time. We talked about, and I've talked about this in all of my sessions with you, really situating the fact that belonging is so crucial to our human needs. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can see that belonging and feeling valued are fundamental human needs, and they have to happen before we can feel good about ourselves and before we can get stuff done, right? And so belonging, no matter, what we feel and how determined we might be to fit into a space, that's going to be really different than whether we have that true sense of belonging. We talked about the sort of nature of feeling like a square, or this is a triangle peg in a round hole. And the process of trying to fit into a space, we often tend to like kind of lose parts of ourselves in that process. And sometimes, at least in my experience in leaving industry, I didn't even realize I was doing that until I looked back on my experience and how much I had adapted and changed just to try to fit in and assimilate in that space. And so what we're going to talk about today after the recap is that's actually a stress response. The response to try to assimilate, to try and fit in, is a response to stress. It's a response to a kind of trauma that we experience and how that affects us. We also talked last time about the differences between allies and advocates, champions and cheerleaders, and then the queen bees and wannabes. And we're really trying to figure out and assess who are those people that are in our corner, who are those people that can help us, and then how do we begin to make boundaries for those who are not going to support us. The takeaways that I sent you all in a follow-up email, and if you missed this, you can catch the recap and the recording online, and I'm going to drop that link here in the chat. The recap, resources, and recording are right there in the chat. Was the first, that we want to find community and belonging where we can. Second, if you feel, or go back to that first one. So what that means, finding community and belonging where we can, we need to connect with people. We need to share our stories, and we need to listen to other stories. When we do that, we begin to reduce the impact of the micro traumas, the stress, the microaggressions that we're facing. Second, if you feel you fit in perfectly fine, and I'm using quotes there, be thoughtful of the fact that others may not. And just because you feel like it works for you we don't want to minimize the experience that others feel. And so if we do that, we may accidentally be complicit in perpetuating those dominant norms just because they work for us, right? And then finally, we encourage you to seek out, as I said just now, and nurture those relationships with allies and advocates, those champions and cheerleaders, but then also recognize who are those queen bees and wannabes. And that's language from Rosalind Wiseman's book here, which is like the movie, that informed Mean Girls. And we want to reset our expectations and boundaries. I do want to give you a little bit of space to think about did you have any takeaways, reflections, applications, things that you've thought about or tried since we met last? I'll let a couple of people share. Anything that you've thought about since we met last that somebody would like to share?
I can share, Megan. I think one of the things for me was I didn't realize the PTSD part until you talked about it, and actually experienced it and recognized it for what it was. But it took a while to actually peel it back enough to understand for myself what was happening. And so I thought that was really, I wouldn't have known it unless we had the discussion and been able to recognize what was going on. So that was helpful in the situation. So thanks for providing that for us to recognize.
Janine, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Suba, I noticed that you unmuted. Did you want to add something?
Thank you. I was going in and out between muting and unmuting to getting my kiddo to school this morning. But thank you for asking. I think I was just very curious when I went into this last time, because I wanted to take away in terms of kind of what I could lead with by example or encourage more people to actually do. And I think the one predominant thing that I am coming off with is that just because I am female, I shouldn't assume that I understand how other, how other women think. I mean, everybody is very individual in that sense. And so to really heighten the sense of learning and to ensure that in micro environments such as meetings, for us to be able to really ensure that people are heard is I think something that I keep going back to. And I remember I shared a flavor of this in yesterday's Tech Directors call too, but really coming back to listening and not assuming that I understand, and really opening and staying open to kind of like feedback moving forward. So I think that has been one of my biggest takeaways, moving forward. And having to do that in the challenge of the construct of ever-changing and dynamic and intense work timelines is always a challenge, but that balance is what I'm really interested to strike a good one at, and encourage other people also too.
Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you for asking, Meagan.
One thing that I was impressed by of one of our peers is they stood up in a public setting and shared like, hey, should we do this to a broader group, right? And so I thought that was brave to say it in the environment. And then there's a whole bunch of chats happening, and our CTO actually recognized it, that it had gone away, but acknowledged that it was there. And so we had a follow-up conversation. And I think it's, if you're not aware and have context, you don't know really, it's hard to put the pieces together. And so it was great to have a follow-up conversation to recognize some of the learnings from this session and sharing perspective, so somebody can understand perspective in a more relatable way if they weren't there. And so I see you, I guess is what I want to say from yesterday. I see you, and thank you for standing up and sharing your perspective.
Thanks for sharing that, Janine. Well, I am excited to hear that you all got some things out of the session last time. I will be really transparent as an instructor in this work. Like, sometimes I leave with a good feeling, sometimes I leave with a knot in my stomach. And I really left with a knot in my stomach after the end of our session last time of like, I don't know that I helped. I don't know that I provided a good environment. And to hear that some of you took some things away makes me feel good. So today what we're going to talk about, we're really continuing to talk about belonging and allies, but we're going to talk about it through the lens of stress and resilience here. And so I'll dig a little bit deeper. But the first thing I want to ask you to think about are, what are some of the stressors that you experience in life and work? What are some of the stressors that you experience? So again, same QR code if you've already got it open. And this is a word cloud, so short answers work best. The endless to-do list. Yeah. Family. All right, communication, timelines, microaggressions, balance is certainly a theme here. Family, not enough time, pressure to perform, expectations, feeling it's never enough. Yeah. The expectations to pick up, administer, organize meetings. Yeah, so there's some gendered stereotypes there. I always joke, and one of the things I learned as a baby engineer is to be terrible at taking notes. So if you're terrible at taking notes, no one asks you to take them. The truth is, I'm probably just fine, but publicly I made sure everyone thought I was terrible at it because I hated people continuing to ask me to do it. So admin roles when you're not ready. So maybe someone's pushing you up and you don't feel like you're ready. So certainly balancing is something. And, when we think about like the sort of gendered expectations, I always wonder how many times men are talking about balance in comparison with women, right? And I think that we've seen this resulted, throughout COVID, is the impact on women who have kids and, traditional gender, two gender or parent households. It affected them very differently, right? If they have more of their responsibilities in those houses, being the default parent. Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing these things. I do want to encourage you, before we move on, take a deep breath and kind of shake it off, right? I know we can't shake off all those stressors, but thinking about them can be a little bit overwhelming. So just take a deep breath with me, let it go and shake it off, whatever you need to do. So these stressors, all the things that we experience in work and life, they are all running through our heads. So at any given moment, our brain is processing about 11 million bits per second. Can you imagine that, right? So our brain is juggling all of these things, and we only have conscious control of less than 100 of them, right? And so even 100 feels overwhelming to think that our brain is trying to process 100 different kinds of things. And that could be things of processing, you've got this running to-do list, you've got this running grocery list, you've got this running how many piles of stuff in my house do I need to manage. You've also got relationships and you've got all these things. And what happens is that affects our mental bandwidth. So our mental bandwidth is this cognitive and emotional resources that are needed to deal with making good decisions, learning, caring for our family, having healthy relationships, and more. So bandwidth, if you think about it, it sounds just like our internet bandwidth. How many of you in this remote world have at any point said I got bandwidth issues? All of us, right? Unless you live in some wicked, amazing city that doesn't have any issues. It's the same thing with our brain. Our brain has sort of a fixed amount of bandwidth that can process information. And you might have a lot of that mental bandwidth jammed by certain things. And people who have been consistently marginalized and excluded have an anchor part of their bandwidth that's jammed with that information. And so bandwidth is reduced by scarcity. It's reduced by scarcity of money, health, respect, esteem, acceptance, safety, affirmation, choices, belonging, time, food, social capital, all those other kind of basic needs. So our bandwidth, our capacity to have that cognitive control and to function in a space is going to be reduced by a lot of the things that you already talked about, all of those things that are taking up space. And particularly for those of us who are trying to function in spaces that do not fit our sort of ways of knowing and doing, we have this whole like shadow job of trying to act and function in a space. And when I say shadow job, it means it's all of that stuff that's crowding that bandwidth, which reduces what we can do. Now, think about this. For those of us who are engineers and technologists, we've survived in a space where we are significantly underrepresented. And we have had a huge chunk of our bandwidth dominated by the pressures of that space. So let's just imagine, just take a moment and imagine how freaking awesome, more awesome we would be if we didn't have that, right? If we just had all of our mental faculties just to be the amazing, awesome engineers and scientists and technologists that we would. I love to dream about that, right? So what happens is all of this stuff that's taking over our bandwidth, it becomes stress. And stress is our brain's response to any demand. Now, not all stress is bad. It's simply a response, right? So how harmful and ultimately, how harmful it ultimately is depends on its intensity, its duration, and the treatment of that stress. And so stress, it can take lots of different forms. It can happen as a result of like a single short-term event, like having an argument with a loved one. Other stress happens due to like recurring conditions, such as managing a long-term illness or a demanding job, which many of you typed into the chat, or just dealing with stress, in relationships. Like that can be a sustained stress, and that becomes what we call chronic or toxic stress. And so while all stress triggers these physiological reactions, chronic stress is specifically problematic because of the significant harm that it can do to our body and the functioning of our body and brain. So again, all of these things that we're doing can actually begin to, reduce our capacity to do the things that we're trying to do. And so again, stress, it's that chain reaction in our body and our brain, and cortisol is the result. And that cortisol is going to create these responses that we're going to talk about here in a second. Like you've probably heard of like the fight or flight, those are those responses. And that's the cortisol that's driving those actions. But before we talk about those, I want to talk about trauma. Now, trauma is something that I think has become the sort of common vernacular more so over the last couple of years. I've certainly talked about it more than I ever have before, mainly probably because we've been through a traumatic global event. But trauma, again, is not a thing. A traumatic event is a thing, but trauma, again, is our process of dealing with something. It's an emotional journey that affects our performance and well-being. And I thoughtfully chose my graphic here I'm not trying to signal that we have baggage. I'm trying to signal this journey of healing in the process of this. Okay?
I was thinking Hawaii. Go take care of yourself.
Yes. Yes, we should all go to wherever our nirvana is. And so this trauma, it affects our performance. It affects our well-being. And so, yes, as Janine says, we do need to take care of ourselves. So when we face stress, our bodies are wired to react in ways to protect ourselves. Our brains, our bodies are wired to protect ourselves. And so again, when we expose ourselves to prolonged stress, our brain can go into hyperdrive, causing us to act in ways that we don't always understand. And it can leave us feeling like we're a bit out of control, even if our reactions are efforts to exert control in some form or fashion. And so stress, like trauma, it's that process more than a discrete thing. Now, certainly there are big T's, big trauma events like death, war, and disaster. And then there are loads of little t traumas, like things that happen in our relationships and in the workplace. And so I do like this definition, and this is a simplified definition by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration that again says that it is an emotional journey that affects performance and well-being. And this makes sense when we consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If something at the base of our needs is threatened, it limits our capacity to reach those self-fulfillment needs that best help us to succeed in whatever our endeavors are. So my next prompt for you is to think about, what are the ways that we react to stress and trauma? What are the ways
I was
that
going
we
to add
react?
one more thing
Go ahead.
about threats. The threats to our basic needs can be real or perceived. So, for example, if you potentially grew up without having significant access to resources like money or food or those kind of things, and now you do, like you have that security, you may still be operating in that perceived threat of losing that safety at some point.
Great point. Thanks for sharing that, Kayla. So think about, what are some of the ways that we react to stress and trauma? We lash out, get moody, we avoid it. Eat, yes. We suppress, question ourselves, we doubt ourselves, we drink wine, we withdraw, we lose confidence. What else? We overwork. Some of us get in motion. Maybe that means you go for a run. Some of those sounds like it can be a healthy response unless you overdo it, and then it can be unhealthy. We deflect, avoid, we lack patience, we ignore. Lots of commonalities here. Imposter syndrome. There's a great article on Harvard Business Review that sort of like challenges, it says like, stop saying imposter syndrome. So maybe somebody from my team will look that up and share it. It's one of my favorite articles to share because I've been talking imposter syndrome for years, but then I read that article and it really challenged a lot of my views, because it's not imposter syndrome. It's people who've been significantly marginalized and excluded trying to survive in spaces that aren't made for them and don't support them. Overwork. All right. We try to justify things. Well, thanks so much for all of your input here. What I'm going to introduce now is certainly nothing probably significantly new to us, but I do want to offer it as a way to begin to frame and think about how we are moving through our lives, right? So there are 4 primary stress or trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I'm going to tell you what those are, and then some of the healthy responses and some of the unhealthy responses for them. We'll try to give some anecdotes to them. And then I want you to think about, where do you see yourself in some of these? Where do you see some of your colleagues? And then we're going to talk about strategies. So the first is a flight response. So so this is they're all acts of self-preservation, right? But this one specifically, and it's a fear state where you begin to confront the threat, to stand up and assert yourself. So a healthy response would be assertion, just, basic assertion, and creating really solid boundaries. Unhealthy responses would be, instead of creating boundaries, we create walls, right? So we put such big walls around us that nobody can hurt us. Also ultra independence. This is one that I really came into awareness over the course of COVID, because I am guilty of this. And having that ultra independence, and basically ultra independence is just putting up huge walls saying, I don't need help. Right. And we talked about this a little bit last month, of the notion of like people who avoid participating in, employee resource groups that could help them, because it's an avoidance, putting up walls saying, I don't need help, I'm fine, right? And that's a fight mode. It could also certainly be aggression or yelling. But what the research also tells us, so the fight response from the cortisol that happens in our brain, it doesn't always manifest in that you're punching someone. It could be that your fists just tense, you get a knot in your stomach, that you like get flushed, and that you kind of have all of these physical emotions. Like that is the same fight response. You may not choose to punch someone, but your body is queuing up for it, right? Any other things that y'all are thinking about around these sort of fighting responses? Kayla, did you have something you were maybe, no, I thought we had talked about something earlier, but the next is the flight response. So flight response corresponds to avoidant behavior. Like you're getting out of there, you're getting away. Janine and I are flying to Hawaii with our suitcases. So a healthy response is that you are discerning in stressful situations and you disengage within limits. Unhealthy responses are isolation, avoidance, and being overly busy. And as I study this, I remember that I had a colleague on my team at Texas Instruments. And again, as I shared in some of my other talks with you all, my team was like super football focused because we all came from Texas Tech, except for I had one colleague, and he wouldn't do anything with us. He isolated himself. He avoided all happy hours, all activities. And as I've really reflected on that, he is a gay man. And he, I think, was using this flight response to avoid that hyper masculine culture that our team really thrived on. And it began to I'm really sad that he missed out, that we excluded him, because I just joined in on what was the norm. And so I was actually complicit in that culture rather than creating different kinds of spaces for us to be inclusive, right? And so that was his mode of just disengaging. Other unhealthy responses is just being overly busy. And that's what someone else put in the stress response of like just overworking. I'll just work, and somehow that's going to prove something to someone, right?
That's definitely me. I like cycle, and when I am in flight responses, I have cycles. I cycle through hyperproductivity, and then I cycle through large lulls of avoidance, which is usually high levels of unproductivity, which results in sleep. And I kind of go through these cycles. So that's usually my like trigger of knowing that I'm in flight responses if I find myself being overproductive and extremely underproductive within 2-week periods of each other.
Kayla, I think we're a lot alike. So the next is the freeze response. So freezing is this equivalent of like a temporary paralysis. It's disconnecting with your body to prevent further stress. So a healthy response means that you're slowing down and you're appraising a situation to determine next steps. But an unhealthy response is like disassociation, literally freezing or feeling spaced out or detached from reality, or like an emotional numbness. And the story that comes to mind for me here is a colleague of a friend of mine. She was a first year engineer at maybe I shouldn't say where. And she was in this like rotation group, and they were traveling with all these young engineers. And she was the only female. She's a Black woman, and a Black queer woman. And she was trying to hang out with the team, and they all decided for whatever reason to watch a football game in somebody's hotel room rather than like in a bar area. And she wanted to hang out because she's trying to like be part of that team. And so she goes up into the room. And let me also preface this of like what I'm about to say could be very triggering, so just guard yourself here for a second. But so they open the door, and it's like 4 men in there, and the guy that opens the door says, hey, this is fun, like we could literally gang rape you and no one would ever know. So a flight response would be to run away. A fight response would be to like yell. But she disassociated. She went into freeze mode. She actually went in the room, and she said it took her about 10 to 15 minutes to like recognize what had just happened to her, and like this abuse, and the fact that none of the other men said anything. And then so finally she's just like waking up from this disassociation and she leaves, and then she reports it, and she's the one that got relocated rather than the men. And so that's a freeze response of just like you come out of your body and you don't even realize what's going on. And then the last one is a fawn response. And fawning is about people pleasing and engaging in pacifying behaviors. So a healthy response is responding in a dignified way that protects your dignity. It's checking in with your values and seeing if what you're choosing to do is allowing of that. And again, it's reinforcing healthy boundaries. Unhealthy responses are people pleasing, assimilation, just foregoing all boundaries to do whatever it is, bending over backwards to do what others, and then just deference. And so these are the 4 different kinds of responses. And the question is, what do we do? Like, how do we bounce back from stress and trauma? How do we bounce back? And so the answer is that resilience is a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And the key, I want to make sure that you hear me when I say this, is that the system needs to also change, right? We just want to help ourselves be successful in the places that we are. Shubha, do you want to add something?
You were right that the comment of the gang rape did trigger a lot of emotions in me, and I'm probably suffering some minor PTSD and actually just thinking about this and not being able to focus on some of the other slides right now. But I'm also wondering, how could you have a healthy response in that kind of a situation? I would imagine that a more human response is the more emotional response. And so where is that line between what we think is appropriate in the workplace? And I understand we're all in the workplace and there's a high level of kind of like appropriateness here, but also feeling human about it. And having those having those moments and without being judged for being emotional or anything else. I think that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. And I completely understand the segue in terms of where you're building in terms of resilience. I think, unfortunately, you set us up well, but I think my mind is still on that right now.
So I have before getting into tech, I was a social worker and I was a special education teacher. And we actually did, unfortunately, have to cover this a lot because a lot of our students and clients would frequently say things that were triggering and inappropriate. And honestly, and unfortunately too, I went to an all-female tech boot camp and we learned a lot about addressing stuff like this. Is usually the most effective way is to just say something like, that was extremely inappropriate and not something you should be joking about. And then that immediately, puts you in the more professional position and is usually enough. And even, most of the case, the other person's going to be like, oh, I was just kidding, blah, 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 blah. And the best response to that is just, not engaging further, but just calling it out, saying it. If there's other people present, that's usually like a kind of a wake up shame call for them. Like, oh crap, I stood here. But also that kind of you're the one taking that first step. And that sometimes makes it easier for other people to be like, yeah, that wasn't cool. And again, unfortunately, it puts the work on the victim. But if it's one of those things where, like for me, I feel better if I am doing something, like it makes me feel like I'm kind of taking my power back a little bit if I'm the one being professional and appropriate in that situation, and I can kind of deal with my own needs later. But again, that's me coming from my experience where I've been talked to like that years over my social work and education experience. So for me, it's less triggering just because I become desensitized to it. I've learned about why it happens. I've learned how to address it, but most people don't have that. But that's pretty much what was drilled into us, is just to, you be the professional one in the situation, you say something, you do your self-care after and address it after, but that's at least a way of calling it out in a professional way, being a good example to other people, But again, only if you have the emotional bandwidth to do that, because again, not everybody, and obviously if you have different personal experiences, that you may have a much more triggering response than somebody that doesn't have certain things in their background.
And Don, did you see from your experience that in situations like those, where was the other party kind of held accountable in any ways? I mean, it just happens to be that, Dr. Meagan talked about a group of men, but this could actually come from anybody, right? And so I think the question is, that story didn't unfortunately seem like it had a happy ending because this woman moved, or maybe she moved to a place where she wanted to. But I'm curious, in your situations, did you see the accountability on the other side too?
So honestly, the few times, now obviously if the person committing it, depending on their mental, well, honestly, like depending on the level of the ability of the client that I was working with, or even if it was just somebody in their life, usually if you just calmly say, that was extremely inappropriate, making rape jokes to women at work is not something you should be doing. Most people want to believe that they're good people. Most people don't have bad intentions. A lot of times they just say stuff like that because they're just not thinking. And a lot of times I would say something and they would immediately be like, oh, I was just kidding. But I would probably say 75% of the time they came up and apologized later. And we're like, hey, I'm really sorry. I can't believe I did that. And to me, that's a bigger win, because obviously I'd still report it, but letting the person know what they did. And in that 75% of the time, if they think about it and they're like, oh God, what did I do? Especially if there were witnesses, that person is going to think about what they say more going forward. And again, I hate saying this because it puts too much of the work on the victim. And this isn't something you should ever have to do. But I found that saying something to the person directly in like a calm way is much more effective in changing their behavior than them getting in trouble with HR, because getting in trouble with HR is going to make them feel defensive. It's going to make them feel resentful. Whereas just saying like, because, I've done it before. I've made some like offhand joke. I didn't think about it. And when the person turned around and said, hey, that's really not cool, I was like, oh God, you're right. It's really not cool. But again, you shouldn't have to. And it's not something that if you don't do it, you're doing something wrong. It's just from my personal experience, that's been a lot more effective. One of the things that we have in my, I skate for a roller derby league and we're a 403c nonprofit, is we have like a restorative justice thing where if someone says something, you basically like sit down with that person and a member of our liaison committee and just say like, look, like I went home and shook for 30 minutes after you said that to me. And, I have stuff in my past and it was super triggering and it made me feel really unsafe. And that's a lot of emotional work, but that changes both people. And that gives the offender a chance to address their behavior as opposed to just reinforcing that stereotype of like, and again, I don't want to say reinforcing that stereotype, but there is a stereotype that you can't say anything in front of women in the workplace because they're just going to run to HR and they're so sensitive and they disrupt the entire culture. So for me personally, I like to just address it like a professional. I do my self-care after, but I've had good luck in someone saying, oh God, I didn't even think about that. And if it's something just a microaggression, I can be like, you know what? That's not cool. Like we had a scrum team named the Brogrammers at one of my companies. And I didn't make a big deal about it. I was just like, guys, programmer is a term for the extremely toxic male dominated culture in Silicon Valley. Like it's extremely exclusive and it's basically a toxic environment. And they were like, oh shit, really? And I was like, yeah. And they changed it. And, it made me nervous saying something, but I said so in just sort of like hey guys, just so you're aware, like this isn't cool. And if I would have gone directly to HR about it, I feel like it would have just bred more division and resentment. But again, that's my own personal experience. And I don't want to say that's the right way or the only.
Devin's offered some really great tips. And what I can tell that Devin has done is she's done a lot of self-work, and she's given herself a lot of tools to help her address that. And so if someone like my friend faced what she faced, it doesn't mean that she did it wrong, that she was bad. I mean, that's what this stress response is. It's cortisol floods the brain and you don't know how to respond. And so if you find yourself in that position, you catch yourself 15 minutes later, you've got to give yourself grace and do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Right. And so what Devin's offering, those are great tools. And we want to get to that space. And, I think about this now, like I have the ability to speak truth to power now when I didn't at 25. Right. And so that's what we get to do as older women. We get to help young women build that power and build that strength and support them in that. Because so often, and what broke my heart about her experience is that she didn't tell me. And she actually lived with me for several months and like sleeping on my couch because she was trying to, get situated in the area. And that she went through that alone broke my heart. Right. And that she couldn't feel like she could come and talk to me. Right. And so how do we build those communities and those networks so that we are supporting women as they go through these things? And so, Devin made a really great point that there are tools that we can use. And we want to begin to build those tools. And we're going to talk about some of those. So here are some of those tools that we can use. And then I want to push us in a breakout room. So I'm going to go through these really quick. There are 5 strategies. And they're going to help us to these effective strategies for building resilience. And so the first is to calm the mind, right? Like this seems generic, but when we focus on calming and clearing our mind, we can pay attention to what's really going on around us and what's coming up within us. So focus on what you choose versus on what pulls at you. And we want to practice noticing our own thoughts and unhooking from those non-constructive ones. The second is to look out the window and breathe. Now you're like, this is weird, but there's like great science on this. This is something that's really important to me, that when I am stressed, I look out a window. And what happens is there's a biological, neurological response that when you begin to focus your gaze on something, it changes what's happening in your brain. And so you can look up the work from Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscientist at Stanford, and he studied the visual system, saying that stress and about how our eyes and our breathing change in response to viewing the world. And so we want to begin to think about how do we look and change our breathing, because that's going to affect how we react to things. The third is to set goals and reflect on progress. Now, this isn't something that we're going to have necessarily the ability to do in the middle of a traumatic event that we're trying to respond to. But when we set goals and reflect on progress, we can see our growth, right? So when, Devin's talking about her ability to like speak up and admit to things in the moment, some of us may not be there yet, right? But we can set goals to say like, my goal is to begin to be a little bit faster out of the chute to address things that come at me. My goal is to be able to deflect things. And so we can set those goals and begin to reflect on them. The next research-based strategy is to connect with others through compassion. And so compassion, it's the intention to be of benefit to others, and it starts in our minds. So practically speaking, compassion starts by asking yourself one question as you go about your day and connect virtually or in person with others. How can I help this person have a better day? When we center around that, now that's different than people pleasing. It's how can I help and serve others? That's one of the research-based things. And then the last one, and this is the one I'm going to send you some homework on, is enhancing our relational network. So people and our support systems can provide empathy or simply help us laugh and bolster our resilience by shifting our perspectives and reminding us that we're not alone in this fight. So in short, resilience is not something that we need to find down deep in ourselves. Like we can actually become more resilient in the process of connecting with others in our most challenging times. And so, I have no skin in the game necessarily to like plug your fan groups, but like this is a great reason for why you should be involved in your fan groups, because and this reflects my own experience, that it wasn't until I began to connect and build community and relation with other people that it was in that process that I became more resilient and was able to better meet the challenges that I was facing. So I'm going to set us up for our discussion, and I want to give us like 20 minutes in your debriefs. So we're going to place you in groups of 5, do quick introductions if needed. I want you to determine a speaking order because I want you to be thoughtful that everybody's getting a chance to talk, and you're going to do it round robin style sharing. And so I want you to do one question at a time. There's 2 questions. Which of the stress trauma responses do you find yourself most often facing in the workplace? And why do you think that is? And then the second is, which of the resilience strategies would you like to focus efforts on to help you reduce the impact of stressors at work? All right, welcome back. I know I robbed you of a minute or so, and I'm sorry for that. But I wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of time to debrief and then wrap up our conversation today. So instead of a traditional question of like, what are some key takeaways? I want to hear, what are some additional strategies that you all talked about, heard, shared, that you want to try, that you want to offer up to the group? What are some additional strategies that you heard, liked, and want to try?
I think one that we had talked about at China, I think it was yourself that brought it up in our group, was the assuming good in people. We were talking about just because of the sheer volume of work, competing priorities and so forth, and the stress that generates here internally, that that there is a tendency to go to fight, and probably not in a great way. And I'm as guilty as anyone of that. And how do we deal with that better? And we talked about the fact that it's may not just be, nobody wants to fail, right? So we tend to retreat into our own teams and become independent. But one thing that China spoke about was just assuming the good, right? We're all on the one team here, right? And just go in with that assumption, as opposed to, oh no, they're trying to, there's some, tension as such, assuming that good intent. So it wasn't, I don't know that it was listed here, but it's just a simple thing. But my gosh, if you go into a conversation in that way, as opposed to, okay, this is what I'm going to tell them, and let me tell, in a more defensive or more aggressive posture, this other approach would be wildly different, I think, the interaction. So
yeah, it's just that, oh, sorry. I was just gonna say it's just the difference between conscious bias and unconscious bias too. Like, you can usually tell if someone's trying to be a jerk or if they're just offhandedly saying something. So
yeah, the context I was mentioning it is in my role in information security, that I always remind my analysts to approach end users with compassion. If there's a malware detection or a phishing link they clicked on or some sort of security incident, because we don't want to trigger their fight or flight response. We want to make sure that we are seen as people who are there to help, as first responders, like firefighters or EMTs, police officers. So, except without the policing, we will help enforce the policies, but you're not in trouble every time we talk to you, and just how important that is.
Thanks, China. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks, Devin. What about another strategy?
It wasn't a different strategy, but I think it was more a tactical, how do you tactically do some of these on a day-to-day basis? And so Shuba was in our group, and she recommended in Headspace before every meeting, there's like literally a 1-minute 5 deep breaths app, and you can go do that. And she was like, yeah, I can be late by a minute to the next meeting, but I'll bring my whole self because I'm calm and composed and not letting the last meeting impact the next one. And I thought that was something very practical that we can do right away.
Yeah, I like that.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned that. One of my peers, they start the meeting or end their own team meeting with a deep breath. They make everybody, like on Friday, shut their eyes and take a deep breath in and do a deep breath out. And they shared it. And so we started doing it as a collaborative effort just on Fridays. And it was interesting. You also build community around it. And I haven't done it since, but I do recognize it as you're saying it, the high value of it.
I would add one more variation to that. I reflective journal. So if I have a quick minute, I'll just brain dump to clear space. For me, when things are written, I don't hold them in my brain space as much because I know I can go back and get them. So that's another piece of that puzzle of headspace, keeping this meditation technique, breathing, jotting things down.
One technique, I actually recently had to do some physical therapy for like my neck, but one of the things that the therapist taught me was that even when you're in meetings, if you turn your palms upside down and place them on your tops of your legs, it forces you to breathe with the lower part of your stomach versus the upper. And anybody that suffers from holding stress in their neck or like going like this with your shoulders, it's a good technique to force you to breathe with your whole your whole lungs, I guess, if that makes sense, with the diaphragm versus doing that anxious breathing. So it might seem silly, but it actually really worked for me. So
I am going to try that because I frequently find myself wearing my shoulders as earrings throughout the day. So
yeah, you don't realize you're doing it till the end of the day, and you're like, "What the heck?" So yeah, palms up, and then the backs of your hands on your thighs. It literally forces you to breathe with your diaphragm. So
this is why I go to roller
stressing
derby
technique.
practice. I go to roller derby practice and hit people.
That's also great.
You know, connected to what China and Caitlin are saying, good ergonomics at your desk also makes a really big difference. So if you've got your keyboard up on a desk, you are literally putting your shoulders in knots. So you need to get a keyboard that is at the proper angle. So Google it. You know, Fanatics, most companies have services. I don't know if they do, but most companies have services to help you get what you need, and evaluations. At least that's what we had at TI. But that's really important because if you're already stressed and then you're like putting yourself in that position, you're going to continue to hurt yourself. Okay, a few final takeaways and we're going to wrap up. We want to make sure that you're establishing boundaries and not walls. Boundaries are good. They are healthy. They help us protect ourselves. They help us protect our dignity. And so help each other build those boundaries and help hold each other accountable. Another thing is to cultivate your garden. And what I mean by that is there's, a common refrain of like bloom where you're planted. But, we've really begun to think about that as like kind of like a toxic relationship. It's asking people to like survive in a space that's not meant for them. But what my sort of twist on that is to think about how do you change your own environment? That means building those relationships. That means having those healthy boundaries. That means cultivating your garden so that you can thrive in that space that you create. And then finally, if this hasn't been clear, we're so much stronger together. If we as women hurt women, we are not doing what we need to do. And since we talked a month ago, Madeleine Albright has passed. My favorite quote of hers is, "There is a special place in hell for women who don't help other women." And I really believe that with all my heart. And so we are stronger together. If we help one another, we're going to survive at a much greater rate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a homework challenge for you to think about relational networks and how you may have some opportunities to develop these. And I'll send a research article that proves why this is really important. So as we're wrapping up at the end of the day, I do want to give you a chance to reflect on what have you learned today? What is it that you want to do different? And then what's an immediate action item? And then as you're doing that, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to get your feedback. I do welcome your feedback. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions. You can call me Meagan. I do think y'all make me giggle every time you call me Dr. Meagan, but Meagan's fine. And I'm so grateful for what you have offered to this space today. I hope that it's been a valuable learning opportunity and a reflecting time for you to connect with other people, right? And this isn't the end. Laura is working with the other fan and Emily, they're building up these fan groups, and those are for you. You get to develop them. It's not Emily's and Laura's job to do that. That's what you get to create, and you get to build that community. And so I hope that you do. As always, I'm happy to stay on for a little bit longer to talk to y'all. If you have to go to something else, I fully understand it. But let's hear some of those immediate action items that you want to share. What's an immediate action item that you want to share? You can just unmute and tell us if you want, or you can use the Slido, or any questions that you had from the day that didn't get answered.
I attended the MC WIT conference once. One of the things I really like about them is they do a lot of peer-reviewed studies, and they provide a lot of assessment tools and toolboxes and research-based resources for companies. And one of the things they recommend is sending male leadership to their conference to learn about the toolkits and the assessments and the actual research-based things that you can do. And so I would really love to know what steps our leadership are taking, if they're planning on attending any conferences, if they're planning on using any tools, if they're going to do an assessment, just to see like what we can do on a larger scale.
I don't have the answers to that. Does somebody from Fanatics have some thoughts?
I don't mind picking. Oh, Laura, you probably know more than I do.
No. You go, Leela, and then I can tag on afterwards if that's all right.
Okay. I mean, from my perspective, we definitely taken our first step with Dr. Meagan supporting us with sessions with directors and above. I think it's up to now also gets to continue the momentum, and I'll be hoping to, I guess, leverage all of you to also be ambassadors and champions with asking those insightful questions around what are you going to do with the things that you heard about, and ensure that the conversation continues. So from my perspective, I'll be going back to Ramana and his staff to understand how do we take some action on the back of what we've learned. I know a lot of the directors and above have felt quite inspired, but inspired versus action are two different things. So I'll be driving that conversation.
Yeah, they just published an article on how to actually evaluate your office to find environmental things that are
yes, I've seen Joanne did that. Yeah. And I think I've just flagged it to Laura to see if it's an exercise that we could take and make it practice, right?
I would love to see our percentage of participation
in the director's workshop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have it handy right this
second.
Oh,
no. I'm just saying, like, when we're talking reflections and understanding,
sure.
Thinking back of our conversation in our last session of who's doing the work. I'd just be like, we've provided a mechanism to do something. How well did we participate?
Definitely.
Because I hear you and I agree. Like, if the people who participated found it of value, the other side of it, I don't know what the number is, but did we get great participation? Because that means something, right? That's something to celebrate. And it's a message that goes outward to all of us of, yes, the message is being heard at least the level it was targeted to.
Yeah, agreed.
On all of it. I have no idea, like all of the sessions, I'd just be curious from that perspective.
I really agree with all of that. And Devon, thank you for sharing and recommending. I think I'm going to go back to Dr. Meagan. Yes, I am teasing for sure. I'm kind of jumping onto that bandwagon. But I think what I'm hearing is that we know that we can all shape what we want to make progress with, but it does entail every single one of us and all of us. So to Leela, if I could piggyback off your point, it's one thing to be inspired, but it's another thing for the action. So definitely we need to dig into the participation, Janine, as you said, and then also make the next steps. And we'd really love to regroup and make sure that, each of us are really have got that platform, we know that we're empowered, but also that we are making sure that that also lies with a wider group than maybe the one that we're on today, and how we can roll this out at other levels too. So again, it's tapping back into that every single one of us is really shaping it. But just as a super quick note, thank you so very much. The reason why I didn't immediately respond is I was reflecting. That was one of my takeaway actions. I want to be a little bit more kind of even more thoughtful with all of the contributions and feedback. So that's why I didn't immediately respond, and I was jotting some notes to myself. So that was my one takeaway action for sure.
Thanks, Laura. What else? I love the comments here. You either mean actually gardening or cultivating your garden, and I assuming that's what you're meaning today. And I love that, right? Like, we have to cultivate these relationships and friendships and surround ourselves. One of the things I took away, I did a training with Tara Moore, and she wrote this book called Playing Big, which I usually have it sitting right here because I recommend it to everyone. This book is called Playing Big, Practical Wisdom for Women Who Want to Speak Up, Create, and Lead. I love it, love it. And I did a course with her. Whoops, I just hit my mic, sorry. That she runs every February. And it was about $1,000, but it was incredibly worth it. And one of the things that I learned from that is surrounding yourself with the right people. And I kept mentioning that I had these experiences where women were always like intimidated by me, or like they're just kind of like catty. And these women in this meeting all across the globe, they're like, well, you're hanging around the wrong people, right? And it was this amazing aha moment of like, well, shit, like I am hanging around the wrong people. Like, I need to hang around those women who are going to support me and lift me up. And it was like such an aha moment, because I realized, like, here I am trying to be a square peg in a round hole, trying to fit in with these people who aren't my people. And so that's also a really big reminder to us, is that, you know, just because there are other women there, they may not be your people, they may not be your community. And so we have to find those people. And that's also part of growing up and realizing, like, not everybody's going to like you, and that's okay. But you want to find those people who are going to be your champions, your cheerleaders, your advocates. I have a group of women that we work together and support one another, and we call each other our slingshots. Like, our goal is like, how do we, as we're moving, just slingshotting one another ahead, and you know, so find your slingshot, who's going to be that person to help you. Kathleen, Kayla, any final thoughts?
I was just going to say, Devin, isn't slingshotting a roller derby term? Isn't that something that you all do in roller derby, where you slingshot your?
Not so much anymore. We called it a whip.
Whip. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, we don't do that too much anymore.
My last comment is, I go back to what Devin said, and we said in some of our small groups, is this idea of how do we get the people around us, the men and women, on board, and starting out from a place of assuming the best intent, and helping everyone to move forward in their journey is really important. So that's been useful for me throughout my many years.
Yeah, I also think the tools, understanding tools, because oftentimes you're caught off guard, and it reminds me of scuba diving. They make you go through all the exercises before you can get certification, because in emergency, you have to practice it or know what's there. And often, for me, that's kind of where my mind went, is you're caught off guard. And so it's self-defense, right? Know what tools you have. So then you can practice it, because it is on us to recognize it. And so if it becomes more conditional, as Devin has experience in it, right? So it's more familiar and easy for her to navigate. So that was one of my takeaways, is just really looking at the different tools and how ones I do use and ones that are new to me that I should think about. And in the cases that they use them, in the cases they are of value.
And role play those tools with your peers that you're comfortable with.
I was just going to add my last little thing was just celebrate, right? We have done a lot of work over the last month, and even if this is just the start, take the moment to honor the work you have done, right? And I think sometimes for all of us, most of us type A, we want to be high functioning. We're always on to the next thing, and we overlook how much work we've done in the last 4 weeks. So even though there's more work to do, take a moment after this and really just celebrate the awareness changes you've had, the attitudinal changes that you're feeling, the motivation to keep going in this moment.
It's a great call out.
It's a great point, Kayla.
I think with the good intention, the other thing, and I appreciate it, and sometimes is sharing with somebody what you perceive of them and the value they provide. We often get so focused on doing, we don't pause and say, Devin, I appreciate you stepping up and having a voice at the table. And so that for me is something that I value and forget. And I think it's a good thing to remind each other is you can help lift by just taking a few seconds and reflecting and sharing with somebody how you value them or what you saw in the strength of what they had done.
That's a great point, Jenny. And something else you said just a moment ago too made me think, like, sort of the nature of resilience and the nature of grit is that once you've been through it, you hopefully go through it better the next time, right? And that connects to what Kayla said of like celebrating. It also means give yourself grace, right? Like if you find yourself in one of those stress responses that you're like, oh man, like that's not what I wanted to do. Next time you'll be ready. Like you're more likely to be ready because you'll have been through that and you'll have survived that. And if you do the work and reflect and think about it, then you've got those tools to know how to respond in the next moments. We gotta have grace. We can't hurt ourselves for those things. Thanks so much, Caitlin. Appreciate you.
Your comment, like it all kind of fits together too. One, if you have a network and you're in a safe space and comfortable enough to talk about something, sometimes you don't recognize like, oh, that the person I had somebody say something like, give yourself grace. Like this, like just, it's okay. Like, it's okay to be in that position, that you don't have to like fight out of it. And that was a calmness for me of just the words in itself was a positive trigger just to go like, oh, like, yeah, pause for a second. And so I looking at it and reflecting back, it's totally true. And you don't recognize it sometimes when it happens. But if you open up your eyes and reflect, it happens a lot if you surround yourself in the position to do that.
So true. Irina, anything you want to add?
I just want to say thank you so much for the meeting today, and this is the second meeting. And I saw that when you have some issues or stress, you're not alone. It's so helpful to see that when you're working, you don't think that, hey, someone could have exactly the same ideas, the same thoughts. And right now I see that, yeah, I'm not alone. And for the company, it's important. I really appreciate that I see that my company is care about that. So yeah, this is what like the main point what I saw. And yeah.
Thank you. That's so true. We aren't alone.
Yeah, great content. Thank you very much. Really, really value the content and the sessions. So thank you for putting it on.
Well, I will follow up with an email with my promised homework exercise and to give you some more to think about. Laura, any final thoughts from your team, Layla?
Layla, do you want me to go first?
Go for it.
Awesome. Got a lot of thoughts coming around in my mind, but I think more the final thought that I want to share is I am energized to work well, partner with each of you, each and every single one of you, but also specifically Ramana and his direct reports. But I do have to give a little bit of, well, it's not a little bit, it's a lot of appreciation for Leela, because Leela has really re-energized the WIT community. And I'm already kind of getting Slack messages from Leela about, you know, the specific actions we can do. So that has actually re-energized me to make sure that we partner on it and we do the doing and we get the actions going. But honestly, none of this couldn't have been made possible without each and every single one of us shaping it. So I'm full of gratitude in that respect. And I am just like, I am eager to get onto the next stages of how we can get this going. So yeah, those were my kind of jumbled thoughts, and hopefully they made sense and landed.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Sorry, I'm feeling super sick, so that's why you're not seeing my face. But I'm still very excited for what's happening. I think for me, it's I love the sessions and I love the energy and ideas. I'm just going to be very tough with myself and Rama's staff on what's next. And I was saying to Laura that what is next needs to be incredibly visible. I think by making small changes, we are going to do ourselves a little bit of a disservice. So I think we need to identify what it is that team ultimately has bought into and can commit to. And that's a lot to ask. And that's a lot of personal beliefs as well as company beliefs that I think we need to knit together. But I am super excited to have that conversation, and I'll continue to bang that drum. But that's why I said earlier to the bigger group that I ask you all to continue to bang a drum yourself, because it's not going to get changed by one conversation. It's by continuously bringing that topic up and being brave with examples for where we have failed. And I don't want to be calling out where we failed for negative perspective. I want us to call out where we failed, because we can only then improve. So I'm hoping that we can be disciplined, honest, and intentional with each other about how we continue to help the organization, because it's a big beast to move, to make a difference. So shout at me when you haven't heard enough. Shout at everyone around you off the rooftops to make a positive change.
Well, Leila, on that note, speaking of positive change and beating a drum, after 4 years of beating a drum, we got the green light for sponsorship and recruiting at Lesbians Who Tech. So this is first year, so it's pretty awesome.
Congratulations.
First place I'm sharing it, actually. So yeah, I was really excited, and beating the drum, it was getting less intense over years, and I was quite surprised to see a response. So that was awesome. So just wanted to share.
Well, I'm gracious. I'm grateful for your tenacity with it, Janine, because I know that I think when you bang a drum for a very long time, you can be like, how much longer can I go on with this? Is this actually ever going to happen? I feel passionate about it, but if the organization doesn't, then it doesn't. But I know that you are incredible at continually to go after the topics that are close to your heart. So I'm so grateful there was a result, and hopefully it's space you want to continue with more topics on our agenda, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll share it out on the channel. But yes, and it was through our Pride group, that Ideas sponsored it, which was awesome.
Amazing. Well, we should shout it in Ask Me Anything, the next one. I don't think there's one this week, so maybe next week.
That's a great idea. Awesome.
Well, I feel energized, and that's not something I usually get to say after pouring my heart out in teaching. And I'm still so encouraged by you all. And this is our last official engagement that's on the books. I feel like already a loss with my Fanatics friends and team. And I'm so grateful for you all and for the opportunity to work with you. And I hope that we'll be able to stay in touch and continue to send strategies your way and give you opportunities to connect. And yeah, so Laura, Layla, thank you so much. Janine, thanks for your contributions to all of our conversations. And Arena, I'm so glad that you're here as well. And Devin, you've added a lot of value to these sessions. So with that, any final questions? And
thank you, Meagan. Huge thank you, because it has been an awful lot of time and investment, sometimes without a lot of guidance. Let's be transparent there. But yeah, there's been so many highlights, and of course the fireside chat with Ramana as well really kind of set the intention as well. So huge thank you to all of you. Fantasy, Kayla, Kathleen, Casey, hopefully I haven't missed anyone out, but huge thank you for all of your expertise.
thanks so much.
You all have
All right.
inspired me for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.